In the heart of the One Dish with One Spoon Treaty territory, Niagara's Sean Vanderklis and Carl Dockstader dish on any and all issues from a First Nations perspective. From pipeline politics to poverty to pan-Indianism and more, Sean shares his concrete Curve Lake take and Carl gives an urban Oneida angle. You are listening to One Dish, One Mic on the Niagara Podcasters Network.
We're here in the heart of the pop-up podcast studio at Cowork Niagara with another edition of One Dish, One Mic, featuring Carl Dockstader
and Sean Vanderklis.
Today, we're going to talk about the marvel that is residential schools. What I think what a lot of people don't know is how helpful residential schools were. It's really, I think it's understated how well-intentioned and how many well-intentioned people were out there helping us. I mean, did you know I used to be a savage? Did you know that?
No, tell me more.
Well, once upon a time, our family was living lovingly. We were
savagely. You were living savagely.
Yeah. Speaking funny languages, getting our own food from nature, living in balance with the ecosystem. We were not using money, right?
Yeah.
Like imagine a world with no money.
That makes no sense.
Isn't that terrible? Yeah,
Taxes.
Awful.
How did you pay for this world?
Yeah, exactly, right? So fortunately, after several beatings, a little bit of sexual abuse, and plenty of physical violence, and we learned our place.
Yeah.
So we're now civilized people,
living in a civilized world.
Yes. So the first person I'd like to thank is Senator Lynn Biatch. Biatch, right? Let's go with Beyak.
All right.
Senator Lynn Beyak. If we have that wrong, then maybe we should go to residential school and learn English better, right? I think. So, what's your take? What happened there? For maybe for the listeners that don't know, a Canadian senator, which is this unnecessary level of government that Canada sees fit to have, and its sort of made up political system that still has crowns at the head of it. There, in addition to having an unnecessary crown, there are these unnecessary senators
that are unelected and appointed.
Yeah.
So no
a political appointee.
Yeah, exactly. So in the world that is technology, I've been fortunate enough to get a copy of what Ms. Biatch has said. And she said, and I quote, "Today I will take a broad look at several timely Indigenous issues that are before us. I speak partly for the record, but mostly in memory of the kindly and well-intentioned men and women and their descendants, perhaps some here in this chamber, whose remarkable work, good deeds, and historical tales in the residential schools go unacknowledged for the most part and are overshadowed by negative reports. Obviously, the negative issues must be addressed, but it's unfortunate that they are sometimes magnified and considered more newsworthy than the abundance of good." Quote, unquote. And, wow. It's 21st century. To have these views, to have these perceptions of what residential schools are. I mean, you if you were to go back in time to 2008 when Stephen Harper made the apology for the residential schools, he unequivocally said the point of a residential school is to kill the Indian in the child.
Yeah. That was the whole. I don't doubt that there were some people that thought that they were helping. I don't doubt that there were many people that thought that they were helping.
Right.
But to try and emphasize that as a point of pride for Canadian history on any level is shameful. It's absolutely shameful.
And I don't doubt that there may have been participants in the school who may have had a positive experience. Right? I don't doubt that at all. It's possible. I mean, we are humans, and sometimes humans do good things. But for the most part, that's not the case. Yeah. I'm not going to highlight one positive experience that overshadows thousands of experiences, right? For the most part, it's pretty unanimous. The consensus is in residential schools were not a positive thing.
Yeah, Senator Beyak, she highlights Thompson Highway, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's where it's maybe a little bit easy to get mistaken on what happened there. Any good that came from the residential schools was a result of the resilience of the Indigenous students who went to the residential schools, period. The teachers don't get credit.
Right.
The priests don't get credit. The politicians don't get credit for any of that. If an Indigenous child went to a residential school, which was a fundamentally broken system, and managed to actually come out ahead of where they were before they went into the school, I think that's the story of Indigenous resilience. That in and of itself is a testimony to the accomplishments and the ability of our people. And not, I'm sorry, there's not a world in which I'm willing to give any credit to the people that ran the residential schools. That's not, there may have been well-intentioned Nazis, but when would we be celebrating them? When's that day?
Yeah, exactly.
Is Senator Beyak going to lead that call too?
Yeah. And maybe, I guess, to put it into context for some people, I mean, we may have people listening here who have no clue what residential schools are. It was the policy of the Canadian government, essentially, to take Native Indigenous children from their families, put them in essentially a boarding school, and teach them for 10 months out of the year, approximately. The last school officially closed in 1996. Again, I want to say that. The last school in Canada closed in 1996.
Yeah, I'm in my 30s, so I would have been 16 at the time. So
I was 10 at the time.
Half of my life, there have been residential schools. Still half of my life.
Yeah, a third of my life.
Relatively young person. That's most of the listeners have been alive while residential schools were open. It's not this phenomenon that exists in the past or something that's far away. I mean, that's, I think, also to give a little context, that's where this all started, was the Langevin block. Again, forgive me if I'm not saying that right, but the Langevin block in Ottawa, right, is named after one of the architects of the Indian residential school system. Right. And there was a call to change the name of a building. So what? Change the name of the building. There's some great expense associated with that. Apparently, Senator Beyak is claiming that it would be so costly that they wouldn't be able to afford water. Yeah. You can either pay to change the name of the Langevin block, or you can bring water to First Nations reserves that haven't had water for all this time. So I guess, given the choice of the two, then let's snap our fingers and have water already. Right. We're a year and a half into the new government, and there's still water crisis. There's still a suicide crisis. There's still a housing crisis. There's still a health crisis. There's still a missing and murdered Indigenous women crisis. There's still a number of crises. But please, let's talk about how great residential schools are. Let's dedicate hours of news time and pages of editorial comments to how wonderful the residential school system was, and how uncelebrated the non-Indigenous heroes of the residential school system were. Oh my goodness.
For me, I cannot fathom that we're having this conversation. It just are we in the Twilight Zone? Is this a thing, really? We have all of these inequalities in this world. Like you said, you just went off and listed a bunch of them. But yet the topic of the day is well-intentioned schools. Yeah. Well-intentioned schools. And to put more context to that, Senator Lynn Beyak is a conservative senator who holds a seat in the Aboriginal caucus. So she is one of the voices who essentially has the ability to make profound change in our lives and still holds these views today.
That's the scary part, is that Lynn Beyak says that her comments are widely supported, right, and that she has Indigenous friends, right? Because everybody has Indigenous friends, and that makes it okay.
She suffered with the residential school victims too. That's one of the things she said. I have suffered with these people.
Yeah, I'll bet she really feels that pain.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
As a senator, probably as she was expensing some dinners on some first class flights, she was probably tears were coming from her eyes, right, when she was thinking about it. So, I don't mean to. Earlier on, I sort of was mocking the Crown system and the senator, the fact that we have appointees, right, or that Canada has appointees, and it's not our ways to mock the Canadian system. Yeah. But when Senator Beyak says that she's widely supported, I'm a little scared because I don't doubt that there's a lot of truth to that, because
Right.
it segued into her all of a sudden becoming critical of First Nations finances,
Taxes.
and starting to talk about taxes and protecting ratepayer interests, and then sort of getting into that whole bit where.
I want you guys audited.
Yeah, I want you guys audited was where she eventually ended up. She starts to talk about specifically her exact words again from the comments where she was talking about the noteworthiness of the good doers in the residential school. She also talks about how we need a national audit on every single dollar coming and going out of the Indigenous file. So the implication there is that there's corruption on First Nations reserves and that there's mismanagement of funds, which I don't doubt. But has anybody heard of this? There's this thing in Niagara called the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority.
Oh, yeah. That
Have
thing
you?
that
I don't know if you've heard of it,
doesn't want
right?
to get audited?
Yeah, they don't want to get audited.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right, because everything's on the up and up, right?
Right.
And the mere mention of an audit is seen as being somewhat of an insult,
Yep.
and it took a year and grassroots movements and a bunch of efforts even to get them audited. So the NPCA, I'm not going to say on this podcast right today that they are corrupt. I'm not going to say that they're absolutely 100% corrupt.
But
I'm not going to say that there was foul play on the Burgoyne Bridge,
Yeah.
just a few blocks from where we are
Right.
now. I'm not going to say that. But what I am going to say is that there's an
Show me
appearance
the audit.
there's an appearance of impropriety,
Yeah.
and there's a great resistance to resolve that. It's taken a great amount of time. And I mean, the real point of what I'm trying to say is that there's improper use of funds on any level of government.
Right.
Anytime you have funds that are administered, there's corruption. So to pinpoint, to imply that there's an Indian industry, she doesn't even say Indigenous or
Yeah.
Native industry. She says Indian
Yeah.
industry, and she refers at least a couple times in her speech to the Indian industry.
Yeah.
So I'm going to call a spade and say that referring to the Indian industry as the root of corruption again is a little racist,
Yeah.
when clearly there's corruption all across the non-Indigenous system. So I think that there should be a full-on audit of every institution where tax dollars
Canada.
are used.
Yeah.
All of them.
Nationwide.
For everything, but not prorated that it's going to be Indigenous people first. That's wrong.
Right. And I think Senator Sinclair, too, kind of hit the nail on the head when he said that every Auditor General in the last couple years has said that we are the most audited people in the history of this country. Any programs that come out of First Nations is held to a scrutiny that is higher than any other program available.
Yeah, I believe that.
And it's insulting when it comes down to it.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, like, we're such a small portion of the budget too. Like
Right.
that, I think. I mean, this goes back to we talked in one of our past podcasts about myths, right?
Right.
And one of the myths again is that you and I get these big fat casino checks every month,
Right.
or tax breaks, and we never pay for anything and live this whole sort of tax-free life. In actuality, the federal budget just came out, and the real numbers are that it's been around $8 billion to get allocated for all of the First Nations reserves in all of
Right.
Canada. That's $8 billion of a $300 billion budget.
Right.
So you don't even need to bust out a calculator to realize that we represent 4 or 5% of the population, and that's less than 4 or 5% of the total budget.
Correct.
So the dollar per person that's dedicated to Indigenous people is less than the money that gets spent in a lot of other areas. But again, year after year, it's a file of extra scrutiny.
Yep.
Do they scrutinize every single file the way that they scrutinize the Indigenous file? No, other than our leaders who have made it clear that there's not enough money going to, I mean, think of Cindy Blackstock, right? And think of the $150 million that the tribunal mandated that Canada pay for children. For First Nations.
Did they pay it though?
Did they pay it?
I don't know.
Did they pay it? They did not pay it. $150 million, a drop in the bucket virtually in a $300 billion budget, and a budget that was $22 billion, that ran a $22 billion deficit. They couldn't tack on that $150 million that was court mandated by a tribunal.
What was the verdict though? Like, what were they found guilty of? Do you know?
Maybe you're a little more familiar with this file.
It's called discrimination.
Yeah.
When it comes down to it, Canada was found to be discriminating against First Nations children all across this country. They were held to account, and they've been ordered by a tribunal to pay upwards of $150 million. This came in, what, about a year ago, 2 years ago?
You must mean 150 years ago.
Something like that.
You must mean 100 years ago. You must mean 50 years ago. You must mean 10 years ago? No, this just happened a couple years ago?
A couple years ago.
Wow. So when's it going to end?
Exactly.
Or is it that maybe, you know what, maybe it's that Canada is trying so hard and there's people that are just doing so much good that they don't need to pay this $150 million because the goodwill, like the goodwill of the people that ran the residential school will will their way into a better future for our young people. Maybe that's what's happening, right?
Maybe. I don't know. Maybe we should ask Cindy Blackstock if she just happens to be listening.
Yeah, right. Maybe she could inform a lot of people. As a matter of fact, for any listeners that are out there, if you see the name Cindy Blackstock on a news article, on an editorial, if you see her commentary, read every word and understand that this is a very credible woman who's dedicated her life to the welfare of First Nations children. She has recognized the long-standing, still remaining effects of the residential school system. And I think that's the thing. The last residential school closed in 1996, but the child apprehension rate is still higher now. That's right, than it was during the 60s scoop, than it was during the residential school.
We have more children in care than we did at the height of the residential school movement.
Yeah.
So more of our children are apprehended at a higher rate than they were when they were being taken away to go to schools. Which again, what the fuck? Sorry.
Yeah. No.
I for a second there, I'm like, can I swear? Am I allowed to swear? And then I realized it's my show.
Yeah. I mean, we're kind of laughing while we talk about this stuff, but it's a bittersweet. I mean, but there's no sweet side of it. It's really like it. One of the things, again, sort of taking it back to Senator Beyak, is she implies that we're applying presentism. Like, they had the great John A. Macdonald debate, right?
Yep.
And was he really a good guy? Was he really a good prime minister? Well, I mean, he was super racist, said super racist things, and acted super racist policy, not just against First Nations people, but also against the Métis, the Inuit, and Chinese people.
What happened to Louis Riel, right?
Dragged people. Well, there's the whole, I mean, crushing the Red River Rebellion in the form that he did. Yeah. But then using Chinese people to build the railway, and then the very second that they were done offering any utility value to the nation of Canada, the second that utility value was done, they were denied citizenship. Yeah. They were forced to pay head taxes. There were all kinds of nasty things again, and people died, were blatantly used. So it was super racist. So, but defenders of John A. Macdonald will use a term called presentism. Yeah. And presentism is when you take the moral standards of 2017 and you apply them to 1867. Yeah. But I think that that's an oversimplification. But even if you do apply presentism to John A. Macdonald, right, even if you do apply presentism to Langevin, it's still, in 2017, the racist policy around Indigenous children is still continuing. Yeah. So it nullifies the presentism argument because it hasn't ended. Yeah. We don't have that high moral standard in 2017 to look at it.
It's racist now.
Yep.
And it's racist then.
Yeah. Right? I hate to throw around that word. I really do, because I would hate to. Because it's not a nice word. Right. And it means that some not nice things are happening. But I can't think of any other explanation for it than racism, than outright racism.
And for me too, like, I mean, we're coming up on Canada's 150th anniversary, and I know a lot of people in this area are going to be looking to celebrate and looking for a lot of Indigenous people to celebrate with. But politicians, don't be surprised if people are reluctant to do so. 150 years of being in this country is not a positive thing for Indigenous people. It's not a positive thing for myself. It's not a positive thing for my family. It's just not. I mean, my kids have to see these things, right? Like, I take not a proactive stance, but I post a lot of articles on Facebook, and my son, 11 years old, has a Facebook, and he's reading these articles, and my son's like, Dad, I want to go to a residential school. I'm like, you what? He's like, I want to go to a residential school. Like, to influence our children, you know what I mean? To kind of essentially rewrite history is a slap in the face when it comes down to it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's not right. Not on any level.
Right.
So that, I mean, and that, in terms of Canada 150, it's like Canada came out with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Right.
I truly believe that for most of our life, we've been talking to people that understand where we're coming from,
Right.
that understand a lot of the arguments that we're making, that have seen the forced assimilation, the racism, they've seen the systemic destruction of our ways. They are familiar with a lot of the negative things that have happened, but we've been talking to the same basic people. And then fast forward to last year and the year before, when finally Canada releases the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Right.
They tried with the Kelowna Accord. They tried with the Royal Commission on Aboriginal People. They tried with the Ipperwash Inquiry. There were all these different initiatives. The 1982 Constitution Act even was something that I think was net positive for our people and for Canadian people to understand the plight of the Indigenous person. But I finally started to see in 2015, 2016, my friends and neighbors and people that weren't in my inner circle and
Right.
maybe not necessarily educated on Indigenous issues, I finally started to see them understanding the plight of our people,
Right.
and realizing that Canada has this really dark history, and that in order to truly reconcile that history, that it needs to be acknowledged. Every Canadian needs to be aware of the injustice that happened, the forced assimilation, again, the
Right.
racist policy, and all of the wrongs. So I've been hope-filled for most of 2016,
Yeah.
and then it's almost like there's going to be this little reset switch that happens. Well, okay, let's just pause reconciliation. Let's just take a break from reconciliation for a second. Celebrate how wonderful Canada is for the entire 2017, for Canada's 150th anniversary, and then maybe we'll get back to the reconciliation. Maybe we'll get back to that stuff afterwards. So Canada being 150. Reconciliation is a part of that.
Yeah.
Gordon Downey and the Secret Path is a part of that.
Yeah.
The story of the residential school, the amazing story of the survivors of residential school who led the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. That's something that, again, I'm not sure if everybody knows, but that was actually started by survivors of residential school
Right.
that said that we need to do something. To me, this is a very formative time in the history of Canada. Canada can go one of two ways right now.
Right.
They can go back to the status quo, which will effectively destroy any moral high ground that
Right.
Canada has, or they can continue to acknowledge what's happened. They can put in the over century of work that it took to get to this point, because
Right.
it took decades upon decades upon decades, generations upon generations upon generations of people
Right.
that caused Canada to get to this point. It's going to take several generations to get out of it.
Right.
But they're already starting to turn away from it, and it's being led by people like Senator Lynn Beyak and her supporters. And I don't know. I would like to think that she's a fringe and she's a small group of people, but I don't think
I know.
so.
Well, I mean, after seeing what's going on in the States with Donald Trump, is she?
Yeah, right?
Right?
How do we know? How do we as Indigenous people know that Canadians broadly support us?
And the thing with one of the people running for Tory leadership is Kevin O'Leary. And what he said is, while he doesn't support her comments, he would not kick her out of the Tory caucus. Essentially saying that what you did was bad, but you know what? We're going to let it go. And this guy's running for the leadership of the Tory party of Canada, right? The Conservative Party of Canada. He wants to be essentially challenge Justin Trudeau in 2019 for Prime Minister. And this is what he's saying. Like, every single politician should unequivocally ask for her to step down or resign or whatever it is. She should not be in the position she is. She should not have the amount of say and the amount of sway over what funding we receive if she holds these views, right? I'm a fan of Justin Trudeau, a little bit. And for him to run on the speeches that he ran on, to kind of put Trump in his place about leading over fear, he needs to make an example of her. He needs to step up and say something. He needs to not leave it to Justice Murray Sinclair. He needs to say, this is ridiculous. You need to do something. You cannot be holding these views. You cannot be saying these things. You cannot be having an impact on the funding that Aboriginal people are getting in Canada.
That's the trick. Like that's where I had a funny feeling when these comments came out that honestly nothing was really going to happen, and I don't think that Senator Beyak is going to be held to account for her actions in any way, shape, or form, which validates her very weak and very arguments that have been proven historically inaccurate. She praises the white paper in her comments. Again, I'm going to quote her, and she's going to say, "I too have followed this file for 50 years." She's talking about her saintly service to the Canadian people and to Indigenous people. Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau and Indian Affairs Minister Jean Chrétien's white paper of 1969 was groundbreaking at the time. We cannot go back to it, and I'm not suggesting we should, but most of the grassroots natives were not aware of it, and many people I speak with would support something similar today. Many people would support. So, have you ever? You want to see a group of crazy people? Go, and I shouldn't even promote them, but I'm gonna talk about end race-based law. Yeah. There's this notion that I'm in favor of getting rid of the Indian Act, and we'll have to do an Indian Act podcast episode. Yeah. But the way that people want to get rid of the Indian Act is that Indigenous people should just be like everyday Canadians, just like Lynn Beyak says. They should take a one-time payout for the treaties, and then they can go on to buy houses and have this sort of choice of lifestyle of living in the Canadian way. Right. So everything that I've dedicated my life to, everything that the people at the Friendship Center, in the Friendship Center movement, the people on the reservations, the people that have dedicated their lives to preserving the people that last night I went and saw Gahawi, the honoring. Yeah. And all that knowledge should be traded in for a couple dollars and the right to buy a big house and a nice car and live the Canadian dream.
Isn't there a word for that? Is that in franchise? In franchisement?
Yes.
Is that what that is?
Yes, that is enfranchisement. Right.
So essentially what she's saying, though, is let's pretend like it never happened. We'll give you some money, and we'll go about our lives, right?
Yeah, right.
That's it. Can you speak to the white paper a little bit?
Yeah, the white paper was a 1969 movement where, again, some well-intentioned Canadians were trying to serve the general public.
Who was the Minister of Indian Affairs at the time?
Jean Chrétien. Honorable Jean Chrétien was the Minister of Indian Affairs. They did still call it Indian Affairs back then. Yeah,
well, he still called it like a couple years ago, too.
Yeah, right. And Pierre Elliott Trudeau and Jean Chrétien put their heads together. And I mean, I have to be honest and say that I don't doubt that maybe it was well-intentioned. Right. But that was the idea, was that there would be a one-time lump sum payout that would
residential
resolve.
Schools were well-intentioned too, right?
Yeah, exactly. Along the same good intentions that started the residential school movement. In 1969, they presented what is called the white paper, and it seems fitting that they would want people to be like white people. They called it the white paper, right?
At least they got it right, though.
Yeah, they got the color.
They were open and honest about their racism.
They got right. So they presented this paper, and surprise, surprise, there was a massive backlash amongst the Indigenous people, and a large contingent of representatives approached them and said, "No, absolutely not. Our people have died in wars fighting for, at that time, 2 world wars fighting for Canada." I've mentioned in the past that the Haudenosaunee Confederacy Chiefs Government doesn't recognize the authority of the Government of Canada, doesn't recognize the authority of the Band Office, but did recognize the threat that the Germans posed and actually declared war on Germany in World War I and in World War II in support of the Canadians, the Americans, and the many proud soldiers that lost their lives. So those men gave their lives. The warriors that died in the War of 1812, the warriors that died in the French and Indian Wars, the warriors that died in the many battles, as well as the politicians that fought for their ways, the young people that continued to keep their language going in the forced assimilation system of the residential school, the traditional and cultural leaders who did everything to keep the songs going, to keep the regalia getting made, to keep all of the beadwork being done in the basements of buildings at the time. All those people are the people that stood up and said that this white paper is unacceptable. Right. We always have been free Indigenous people, and we will continue to always be free Indigenous people. We do not accept your offer to be absorbed into the body politic of Canada. We refuse. Right. And within a couple of years, the movement was dead. Right. It was dead on its heels.
Well, at least we thought, right?
Yeah.
At least we thought. Almost 50 years later,
Until apparently Senator Lynn Beyak, who has a lot of people that she knows, including Indigenous people. Those are great statistics she has there that support this movement that she has to bring back a white paper like movement. It's not going to happen. It's never going to happen, and it's not realistic for her to say these things. But my last point is that it's shameful that no one's calling her to task. Why do two Indigenous podcasters have to be the one that are calling her to task? Why can't there be some official level on government to say that, lady, your views are dated, and these are unacceptable?
The only thing that I saw was from the church, and they unequivocally stated that residential schools were not a positive thing. But like, other than Justice Berry Sinclair, not that I could find, at least when I was doing research yesterday, I couldn't find anybody who said this is unacceptable. I mean, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. This is a podcast. But I couldn't find anything. And the 30-minute Google search that I did, not one thing. And this is the 21st century. I should be able to find something literally at this disposal of 2 minutes, right?
Yeah.
So doing a 30-minute search and nothing shows up is ridiculous. Like, every politician should be saying, we cannot accept this. In Canada, we cannot accept this. Right? We take pride in our diversity. We take pride in our multiculturalism. We take pride in everything that we say we promote. But now's our chance to kind of put our money where our mouth is, and nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It's got to change.
Yeah.
I don't know what reason I have to believe that it's going to change. It's like you said, it should be easy to come across the information that makes it clear that this is wrong.
Yeah.
There are a set of policies that need to be reversed permanently, not on the whim of whichever government happens to be in for a 4-year period. These things need to be changed. Need to be changed permanently. The Catholic Church has not apologized, by the way. All of the other churches that were involved in the residential school system have issued formal apologies and have undertaken some form of effort, however strong they may or may not have been. They have issued formal apologies, which is in and of itself. The Catholic Church still has yet to issue a formal apology for the residential school movement.
Maybe they're one of the supporters of Lynn Beyak.
Maybe that's. How do you know? Like how do I know that 9 out of 10 of my neighbors don't support her? Right. That's what's really tough for me.
You know what the thing with politics too is that it's not black and white, right? There's a lot of gray in politics. There's a lot of I can't really find the answer, right? So there's a lot of speculation. Things that happen to Indigenous people is black and white, right? The laws that were written are black and white. So for them, for people not to know and not to be pro-Indigenous or kind of have these thoughts and views that
it's unacceptable. It's unacceptable,
right? Like, I mean, you do the research, you can find out what we had to go through, right? I mean, I'm pretty sure there's still a law in Canada saying that 3 or more Indigenous people in a gathering place, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead, explain that.
That's why there's only 2 of us hosting the show, because there was a time
if we get a third Indian,
three Indian people in the same place was considered to be illegal.
Yeah, so constitutes a war party, right?
Or colluding to do something. Yeah.
Our dances were outlawed, right? Our songs were outlawed.
Yeah.
And for people not to understand that, I mean, again, takes a couple minutes to do a Google search, right? You should know this. This should not be a contentious issue.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be. History has never been on our side, but in this case, it's on our side, right? Yeah. It's written down. It's been practiced. It's been studied. It's been examined. There's been reports upon reports that have verified and validated everything that we're saying. So, that being said, any kind of traveling thoughts there, Mr. Dockstader? Any last-minute words that you want to leave our listeners to?
Yeah, I think that in the vein of the great Niagara media that exists out there, whether it's the View from the drive-thru or whether it's the burning question on Greg Miller's podcast, I think that there's some really neat ideas that happen in the media. So what Sean and I have been working on is finding a way to wrap our show and to leave a final thought. So we're, for now, the working title, or maybe the permanent title, will be the traveling thought, and that's a shout out to, at the end of a lot of gatherings and a lot of powwows and a lot of other things, there's a traveling song. One of the last things you do is you try and send people off in a good way. Yeah. You try and do that one last song, and at the same time that you're doing the song, the firekeeper will often throw a log on the fire, and that last fire is meant to burn so that the ancestors can guide people back to where they came from in a safe and happy way. So in that same way, I think we'd like to try to end our podcast with each of us giving a traveling thoughts in the same idea as the traveling song. Yep. So I've given a little bit of thought to what my traveling thought for the week would be.
Okay.
And that traveling thought is that in spite of Senator Lynn Bayak's comments, in spite of my skepticism around the fact that there's still a crown government, the fact that there's still a level of appointed senators that are making comments along the lines of Lynn Beyak, I still believe that the potential for greatness within the people of Canada exists. I still believe that will is strong. Yeah. I think that muscle is not flexed enough, and that it's not exercised, and that not enough people have come forward. But I think that every Canadian needs to come forward and say that I recognize what happened at the residential school movement. Right. I'm going to move forward and be sympathetic to the plight of the Indigenous person. But most importantly, I recognize the strength and resiliency that it took for Indigenous people to get to this point in history and to live the way that they're living now. And I want to support a thriving, vibrant Indigenous culture in every single way possible in everything that I do. So I've seen that hope demonstrate. I've seen that will demonstrate, and I still have that hope that that's what's going to happen moving forward. And that, for anybody that's listening, I expect the normalization of championing Indigenous causes to become interwoven into the fabric of the Canadian identity. That's my hope. Yeah. That's what I believe can happen, and that's what I would encourage for any listeners. Do you have any traveling thoughts?
For me, one of the things that I just want to stress is do your research, people. You can have negative views. You can have positive views. Just make sure that they're backed up by research, that they're backed up by you taking the time and looking into whatever it is that you're talking about. Again, for me, everything is black and white when it comes down to Indigenous people living in the country we call Canada. It has not been a positive experience. And for people who don't realize that, I would highly encourage you to take 15 minutes of your day and just do a quick Google search. Take 20 minutes. Do what you must, but make sure that you're well informed before you make speeches. Make sure you're well informed before you make your views public. I want to say that going down the road, the relationship's going to strengthen. I want to say that a lot of people are going to come to the plight of the Indigenous movement, and I'm hopeful for that. But it's not going to happen if you don't take your time to form that opinion. So from me to you, take that time, do the research, use the tools that are at your disposal. Everybody has a smartphone, everybody has a computer, everybody has something that they could use to inform themselves. So those are my traveling thoughts.
Awesome. Don't forget to tweet this podcast. Don't forget to share this podcast with your friends. Don't forget to click the blue like button on Facebook.
Or you could heart it too. You can get a reaction.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. Give us a reaction and spread us around social media and tell all your friends about One Dish, One Mic in the heart of the pop-up podcast studio at Co-work Niagara. Thank you everybody for listening to our podcast today.
Thank you very much. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to One Dish, One Mic on the Niagara Podcasters Network. Your hosts are Carl Dockstader and Sean Vanderklis. Recording is done at the Pop-Up Podcast Studio at Co-work Niagara, home of Niagara's independent workforce. Executive producer is Trevor Twining. Production assistance by Daniel Twining. Show artwork by Mitch Baird. Music by DJ Shub, used with permission. If you have show ideas or comments, you can reach us on Twitter at Niagara Podcasts.